Up until this point, Disney had treated the animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with nothing but respect, and you would think so due to its significance. It was the first feature-length animated film released in the United States. So for its almost 90 years of existence, Disney has treated it well. Aside from when they removed it from Disneyland's Fantasmic, but that's pretty minor. But at least they never gave it a direct-to-DVD sequel, and they even made improvements to the ride. It's clear that they cared a lot about this movie, but sadly, Disney wanted to continue their trend of remaking their animated classics into live action, and one of them they decided to go after was Snow White, because of course. I mean, it was only a matter of time, right? This one's interesting though, since it had the most pre-release hate that I have seen for any of these live-action remakes. That kinda gave me hope for humanity, until I realized the hate was for bigoted reasons. Taking on the titular role is the young and talented Rachel Zegler. She has been on a roll with acting gigs these past few years. She was in West Side Story, along with Ansel Elgort. She was in Shazam 2, along with Zachary Levi. She was in Spellbound, produced by John Lasseter. And she was in the Hunger Games prequel. Now she's in Snow White with Gal Gadot.
Oh, come on!
I was not excited for this movie at all. I haven't liked most of the live-action Disney remakes, and this one looked very dumb. The footage they showed at D23 made me cringe to new levels, but as the film got closer to release, it was getting some early praise, and that had me a little hopeful. But then I remembered that Beauty and the Beast, Mulan, Aladdin, and The Little Mermaid all got early praise too, and yeah. Anyway, I think it goes without saying that I did not like this movie, but I'm not going to be one of those grifters whose sole purpose is to make money from hating on women and minorities. With that being said, there are aspects of this movie that I think almost worked. I think most can agree that there wasn't much to the character of Snow White in the original, so they had the opportunity to make her more fleshed out, which in this case is not having her motivation be to get married, but to become the great leader that her father wants her to be. There's still romance, of course, and I'll talk a little more about that later, but it's not the main goal of the main character this time. This is all okay on paper, but by doing this, they still didn't give us much of a reason to latch onto her as a character. While not having much to her originally, we were still able to see that she was a young girl who was very vulnerable. There are moments where we are afraid of what might happen to her, and seeing her innocent and cheerful personality allows us to understand that she's a kind-hearted person, which is a perfect contrast to the Queen's dour appearance. But they decided to throw that away for the sake of being more modern. They go way too hard on Snow White being a strong, independent woman that it's hard to get a sense of fear. A most notable example of this is the hunter about to stab her by the Queen's orders. Instead of making her fear for her life, she just stands there and says, "Why?" And honestly, I was asking the same question too. What exactly are we supposed to get from this? Throughout the movie, she has this strong-minded appearance to her, and that comes at the sacrifice of what made us care about her. It certainly helps that the original Snow White was 14 years old, and this new one is not. But I'm sure a lot of the decisions regarding her character mostly come from the writing and the directing. Oh, did I forget to mention that this was directed by Mark Webb, the director of The Amazing Spider-Man? He really is no stranger to ruining the glorious red, white, and blue, but there are far more egregious offenders of that. Rachel Zegler is pretty solid in this movie, but also not amazing. She has a beautiful voice, all the times when she sings are spectacular, but when she's acting, it's hard to not just see that she's acting. Her performance doesn't feel genuine. It's kinda like how I felt about Ariana Grande in Wicked. A good performance, but it's very obviously a performance. Rachel is one of the better parts of this movie. I just think she was better in other movies. By the way, I do not condone any of the bullying towards her by grown adults on the internet. Please be mature for once in your lives. Oh, she had Trump supporters' feelings? Shut up! Trump supporters don't have feelings. But now let's talk about Gal Gadot as the evil queen. She certainly looks the part, but is her acting any good? This makes me want to go to Emma Watson in Beauty and the Beast and say to her,
"Perhaps I treated you too harshly."
Gal Gadot gives the single worst acting performance in any of these remakes, lacking any kind of menacing traits or charisma. Funny thing is, she spends most of the movie being expressionless, but then she suddenly breaks out into an extravagant musical number. I'm sorry, this is the type of villain who should not have a musical number. It just goes against her personality. We'll talk about the songs later. Way down, Hadestown, way down under the ground. Like I said before, there is still romance in the film, but it plays a minor role in the story. Instead of a prince, we have this thief guy who, after a few conversations, falls in love with Snow White. While trying to bring these two together in a more natural way, they still forget to actually make the love interest an interesting character. I don't know why he needed to be here. He has as much personality as the prince from the original, which really isn't a good thing. The scene with the bandits feels like filler. The only interesting thing about them is the internet outrage that came from the possibility of them replacing the Seven Dwarfs. But speaking of the Seven Dwarfs, they're here too. When they showed that clip at D23, I thought they looked atrocious. And I still think that now. These dwarves look like garbage, terrible CGI and hideous designs, especially when they show them up close. I don't know why they had to go this route with them since having little people in costumes would have been enough. But now it's very hard to feel anything towards them. We can't connect with them. They occasionally have funny jokes, but these guys are a huge letdown. I want to say the rest of the movie looks visually pleasing, but it doesn't. When there's a physical set, it looks nice, but there's also a bunch of CGI animals and scenery that really take you out. Not to mention the editing is also atrocious. But who cares about that? Let's get to the songs. Only 2 of the songs from the animated film remain. I admittedly liked the new version of Hi Ho, and Whistle While You Work was okay. But of course, there were new songs added as well. They frickin' suck. Okay, they're not the worst things I've heard, but they are just bland and generically written. There's the generic "This Is Where We Live" song that plays at the beginning, the generic "I Want" song, the generic "I Love Being Evil" song, the generic male lead has to have a song, the generic "I'm in love with you" song, and the generic "Time to be a Hero" song. Pasek and Paul decided after winning an Oscar for La La Land that they don't have to try to make good music anymore. Even though I think Wish and Moana 2 both have worse soundtracks, I at least remembered them. I don't think I'll remember these new Snow White songs anytime soon. It's a shame, because Rachel Zegler is extremely talented in the voice department. However, I thought they would have learned from Ralph Breaks the Internet and that pandemic BS that we shouldn't let Gal Gadot sing. Whose idea was that? While there are quite a few changes to the story, they do keep some of the iconic moments that were in the animated film, but in classic Disney remake fashion, it feels more like a checklist of things they needed to include to get those nostalgia points. These moments are so lazily added and don't have as much of an impact. You remember how terrifying it was seeing the queen transform into an old lady? Well, for no reason whatsoever, the movie has her transform in the most uncaring way they could have done it. No focus was given towards it. She just turns into an old lady like it's nothing. But at least we get to see Snow White get poisoned by an apple. Yeah, well, the scene just kinda happens and gets resolved pretty quickly with not much fanfare. Speaking of which, yes, the necrophilia kiss is still there and it feels like such a last minute addition. This was a big moment in the animated film since it happens in the conclusion. I get why they needed to change things around since they needed to lead up to Snow White standing up for herself to fit the theme of leadership, but in that case, why even include the kiss at all? And this so-called climax that they build up to is so stupid. The conflict gets resolved by giving a freaking speech. It's such an anticlimactic ending and it makes the queen's defeat extremely unsatisfying. This was such a disappointing aspect, but this movie also managed to commit the most unforgivable atrocity. This next part is going to be a little spoilery, but no one really cares enough about this movie anyway, so whatever. There's a scene in the middle that's supposed to be emotional where Snow White is talking to Dopey and wondering if he can't talk or just chooses not to because he's afraid to. This led me to believe that they were building up to a later scene where Dopey would actually talk, but I thought to myself that not even this movie would be stupid enough to do that. But they did it. They made Dopey talk in this movie. Why would they do that? It completely ruins the joke of his character. He's supposed to be a silent goofball. Was there anyone who watched the animated film and said that they would have loved to see Dopey go through a character arc like this? I find it hard to believe that an entire crew were patting themselves on the back for putting this in. But Disney is at a point right now where they can do anything they want and still make a profit, which, ironically, isn't the case for this film if we look at how it's doing at the box office. I can't tell if people are genuinely excited for the new Lilo & Stitch movie or are just joining in on some joke. That movie looks so terrible, by the way, but I guess I gotta check that one out too. The live-action Snow White movie isn't very good. Honestly, the problems I have with it get worse the more I think about them. You've heard others say the same thing about these remakes, that they're extremely corporate and misunderstand what made their animated predecessors so beloved. This one is no exception, but I also think some of the reasonings behind the backlash are ridiculous. Rachel Zegler is talented, and I hope she continues getting roles. Gal Gadot... Okay, I have nothing good to say about Gal Gadot, but the point is, this movie is just your ordinary bad film. Someday another good Disney movie will come, but not today.